All right, Gerard, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to finally have you here.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
I like to always start off my podcast by asking my guests to introduce themselves as much to me, because famously I botch every introduction. So, Gerard, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today, please?
Yeah, sure. My name is Gerard Brown. I'm the president of Hotel Management and Consulting, also known as HMC, and we are a extended stay hotel operator. We currently operate 56 extended stay hotels today, mostly in the economy to mid-scale um, sector of extended stay hotels. My background is almost anything but hospitality in a way. Uh, I have a long circuitous route that started as a bellhop at a hotel in San Diego, and then decided I was going to do everything else, and so I went down the route at first of being a pastor, and I went to seminary and
Oh, wow.
uh, did a master of divinity, and then kind of realized, okay, this is good, but this maybe isn't my place in the world, being at the pulpit every Sunday. And so I took what any pastor does. I went into actuarial science and
Of course.
became a risk management actuarial science actuary for MetLife for a couple of years. Found out I was really bored at that job, and so I decided to go something more interesting. I went to PricewaterhouseCoopers. I was there for 7 years working in mergers acquisitions, and all along kind of building up this numbers, trends, financial understanding of businesses. And this unique opportunity came up with HMC to join them first as the SVP of revenue, to really apply what I was using everywhere else, both the people skills, both the mathematical understanding, both the
Yeah.
financial analysis, and came over to HMC just about 2 years ago, and since then have kind of grown in terms of my understanding of the business, and really tried to scale across both operations and revenue, and see it from a really numbers driven, bottom line kind of results driven analysis. And that brings me to today. Pretty strange route, probably not the most typical for hospitality, but certainly has been a really, really good fit and a really exciting place to be in, especially the extended stay market right now. So thrilled to be where I am today.
That's awesome. And you're dead right. I'd have never met a potential priest that has got into data analytics. They seem almost like, I don't want to say counterintuitive, but they certainly, like, one looks at the data and one feels the energy of the world. So I can imagine that was quite a big move for you.
Yes.
Um, I think you said something quite interesting there. Like not having the background in sort of hospitality, or not really having sort of the kind of quote unquote like bone for hospitality, but like thriving in that. Like, a lot of people I speak to, you're probably one of the only ones I've kind of spoken to so far across all the episodes that is relatively new to the space. Like, a lot of people senior in hospitality tend to be kind of nearly lifers in the space, or people who've kind of committed a good chunk of their career to it. So it's interesting that you've kind of made a leap into hospitality and are thriving in that, which is kind of amazing.
It's fun, and look, I didn't expect it either,
Yeah.
that's for sure. But it's I always say that every piece of my background somehow leads to where you are today, right? And so
Yeah.
um, one of the things that I always like to sort of focus and not gloss over is some of that pastoral education and training that I received. If you think of what a pastor does on a Sunday, ideally, it's um, trying to condense, simplify very complex ideas and messages so that people can understand them. And that was the first thing I learned as an actuary. Was I was with a lot of people who couldn't boil it down to
Yeah.
simplified concepts, and and then also relate to the person they're talking to. And so that was always something that I kind of leaned on, and tried not to run away from, instead of just saying, oh, that's, something way back there in my background. You don't need to pay attention to that blip on my my resume. It was always a piece of, like, no, this is what allows me to connect with people. This is allows me to be empathetic and understand. Maybe not allows, but it is trained and emphasized that in my
Yeah.
just what I do on a day-to-day basis.
But it is interesting because I think, like, when you talk about boiling down, like taking that sort of human-centric sort of approach and then bringing it to sort of the data-driven approaches, I think one of the things I hear a lot from hospitality folks is this sort of major sort of transition, especially post-COVID, into extreme data analysis and very sort of like data-centric businesses that restaurants or hotels or clubs have become effectively. And so it's interesting to note that, like, your background has sort of enabled you to sort of thrive. I know you don't use the word enable, but, like, it always opened the door to help you thrive in that space. When it comes to, like, data, and I think that's a good place for us to jump off, I think, into like a topic here is, like, really, given that this is your first sort of foray into hospitality as well, it's like I guess there isn't like a pre and post like experience of like where you are today and like, oh, this is way better data infrastructure than what I had in my last. But I guess my question to you in that case then is, like, being able to use like actuarial level data, so like serious econometric type data, to like make business decisions. Do you see that as a key unlock for you in hospitality in a way that, say, competitor businesses might not be able to do?
It's a huge component. I mean, it's a huge component of how we operate HMC. And that was one of the reasons why it was so attractive to me to make that leap, was very data-centric business. We are one of the few, at least that I know of in our kind of extended stay sector, that is using real live data, everything that's happening at our hotels, from reservations to clean rooms to out of order rooms. Every single component there's data behind it. Our hotels are this wealth of data, and so to take all that in was, first off, just super important. It's everything I do on a day-to-day basis, is really understanding, okay, what's going on at our hotels. And in extended stay hotels, there's always kind of this discussion of, at least I have this discussion, is what makes a healthy hotel. Extended stay hotels are they're different in the sense that they have longer length of stay. You have people there for sometimes months, whether it's construction crews or traveling nurses. And you're always trying to read the tea leaves of, do I have just a sudden kind of emptying of the hotel that's going to happen? Am I replacing those guests well, in a sufficient, manner? And am I pricing accordingly? And so understanding how that goes, it's really kind of moving a huge ocean liner in terms of these hotels. And so you always kind of have to, okay, first, let me look at the data. Do I feel like this hotel is in a good place or not? And that's the first thing we do, right? Let's start from there. And so that's, very, very important to how we run our hotels, and then understanding what's actually happening at the hotel. Like I said, you can have any sort of thing happen at the front desk, but how do we monitor that? How do we understand it? How do we reinforce the good behaviors? How do we kind of cut back on the bad behaviors that hurt your business that you just might not see if you don't have the data behind it? So that's that's a constant kind of battle and a constant place that we live in when we're running our business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess, like, how do you even start to sort of collect that data, and how to see those sort of like tea leaves, so to speak? I mean, was the infrastructure there when you came in, or were you like, okay, that's what if I'm interpreting you correctly, like you talk about like healthy hotel, like what are the key elements that make up a healthy hotel, and then breaking it down or peeling that layer and then figuring out what are the areas then that we could start tracking, and then how do we track that? Is that how you broke it down, or how would you even get to this point?
Yeah, I would say what we had in place already was just through the reservation system and everything that's going on. There's tons of data there, and so we were already analyzing this from an operational standpoint, taking, like I said, all that information. How many clean rooms do you have? How many checkouts? How many dirty rooms? How many out of service rooms? All that stuff, and how much labor then goes into that, and there's all that analysis going on constantly. And then the revenue side was uh, it was advanced in terms of how we were approaching, but we weren't fully bringing in all the data into one place to really be able to monitor more than, well, at the time when I came in, we were at 40 hotels and we're at 56 now. So to continue to scale, especially from a revenue side, means that we have to be able to track that just as much as we track the operational side. So I really came in and started putting a lot of emphasis on the data that was already there, but trying to understand how to really boil it down, how to make sure we see the trends as they're happening,
Yeah.
and avoid kind of those surprises like, oh, why are we at 50% occupancy today when we were at 80% yesterday? What happened, you know?
Yeah.
And to cut out some of the well, the hotel answers, I call them, is when I get an answer, well, people checked out. Well, people check out all the time when you're in hotels. So tell me more. Was it a group? You know, was it were people unhappy with the rates? You know, what's going on, and then what's happening in your market? What are you seeing around you?
Yeah.
Some of that you kind of cut through some of that noise, some of that, you know, simplified answers, because I can actually see what's going on. So that was a big piece to when I came in, to take that data, take pricing data, take reservation speeds, all that sort of thing, and really kind of marry that into the operational side. So really seeing it all kind of in one view
Yeah.
has been a big progression.
And I guess it's like, I mean, it seems kind of obvious. Do you know what I mean? In the sense, like, obviously we should be having this data. You know what I mean? Like, of course,
Yeah.
but like, not that many places do. And I guess it's the quest for why. People check out, but why? Why are
Yes.
rooms not working? What's the why? Like, as in, everything is trying to answer the why. I guess to your point, it's like, then it's like boiling down to the simplified concepts and boiling it down to like what are the actionable items we can take here. So there is a team that you have here that can execute on the data analysis as well, or buys into the type of analysis as well. So it's not just simply analysis. Do you know what I mean? It's like being able to use it like for a game plan.
Yeah, communicating it out, you know, and making sure that people understand some of the why of what we're doing, even from a revenue management side of things. So, you know, that's part of maybe even what's unique in terms of what we're doing with our hotels here is we've taken that revenue management, or at least those direct decisions on revenue, away from a general manager, because they have so many things they need to worry about, especially in economy extended stay hotels. It's not like a robust staff at the hotel. These are actually very minimally staffed.
Yeah.
Um, the service level is pretty basic, and you need your general manager to wear a lot of different hats. And one
Yeah.
of the things I don't need my general manager to do, and sometimes this takes a little bit of discussion and make sure they trust us, and is I don't need them kind of deciding, oh, where do they think the wind is blowing on a given day, and then change the rates accordingly. I need them to be focusing on who's in house, why they're there, what other opportunities as a result of those people that are in house are there, and
Yeah.
communicate that back. And then from my team, it's to communicate to them and say, this is what we're seeing, right? This is how we understand the data. This is what we are understanding by the latest star report or your ADR for today. This is what we see happening, and this is why we're doing the things we're doing, right? And so that two-way communication, and when I talk to a general manager in that way, they respond just immediately. You know, it's okay, I understand. Okay, that makes sense. You know, you might have a bigger view because I've got all the bells and whistles. So they'll say, okay, you know, I can understand where you're coming from. But without that communication piece, or without talking to my district managers or, you know, operational regional directors, without helping them understanding that as well, then, you know, I'm kind of just one man shouting into the void here. I need my whole team to
Totally.
see and understand some of these metrics and what's going on into that.
Yeah, which is incredibly important. And I guess, it goes back to that point I was saying, which is like, I don't think the data, what's the word I'm looking for? Not integrity, but data enthusiasm, whatever the phrase, has really kind of caught on. You know what I mean? I think like lots of hotels or lots of restaurants are stuck with their POS data without having sort of their own database, or hotels are
Hmm.
stuck really using like booking.com or whichever and using that for like data on like, acquisition performance. And it's
Yeah.
like, man, it's like not really your data. Like it's the platforms and it's not very like flexible or like what you can use it for your own needs. And I think like it's interesting to hear you with such an actuarial background to be able to cogently speak to like the ways you can kind of break the data down and you use it to create actionable insights and you use it to drive business forward. I do think there is, and you mentioned the GM and what you want them to focus on. It's interesting that the GM, especially post COVID, where there's just an insane hiring sort of issue in
Hmm.
hospitality, that the
Hmm.
GM now is almost like a Swiss Army knife for hospitality. That they need to understand data, but they've got to be a great person. They need to understand P&Ls, but they've got to get out there and like pick up that bit of trash in the corner if it's
Yeah.
like left there. Set the tone, be the leader. They got to really be that quarterback. I mean, I guess like I just like one kind of like last thought on the data stuff is like when you think about like say empowering the GM in the hotel, like how do you boil down the information for them? Given that like how do you communicate the information to them? Because those guys are like on the run. They are like
Yeah.
when they're in the four walls, they are up the four walls. So like how do you communicate that type of data decision to them?
There's a couple of ways. We give them snapshots of certain things that we want them to focus on, and that's actually kind of to your point. We need them to focus on certain things, right?
Yeah.
And if I give them all the data that I'm looking on a day-to-day basis, it'd just be overwhelming, right? Or they're focused on something that maybe isn't as important. And so some of what we do is, for instance, I have just a message of some key data points that goes out every week to my general managers. Here's where you are to budget. Here's here's some key things in house, some key counts that we're seeing that you should be following up on. Here are where we're seeing breakage, where we're seeing people get lower rates than actually what we're advertising, and we need to fix those. So we give them a few key pieces of data, and like I said, once a week on something like that,
Yeah.
because on a given week, they want to know where they're at, but they don't need to stress out on certain things, right? So it's like, especially for a general manager, we really need them doing sales. We need them out in the market. We need them understanding for extended stay hotels. A big segment that we pursue is construction projects. So I need them with a hard hat going to a construction site, going talk to the foreman or the GC and say, we're an extended stay hotel. We're right around here. We can give you a good rate. Where are you staying today? All that stuff. I need them doing those types of things.
Yeah.
And so giving them the right amount of data, boiled down to those key things that we know will move the needle, really is kind of where we focus. And if I give them everything else, right, they'll just be drowning it, or they'll just be snoozing the emails and filing them away because it just becomes worthless to them at that point. But we try to give them
Yeah.
that real key stuff that really matters to them on a day-to-day basis.
That's awesome. I think and you'd mentioned something earlier about like, the data and with labor. And like, you're kind of light weight on labor, it sounds like you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
because it's extended states. But at the same time, like people coming and going throughout all the locations. And so you obviously have to have certain amounts of staff on. I guess from a data perspective, it's interesting because you're able to act in real time to like who's there or who's where. Does like having such access to this kind of data give you a greater edge in terms of flexibility of hiring as well?
I think there that's a tough thing in terms of
Yeah.
flexibility for hiring, right? Because I would say we generally know these hotels need, let's just call it eight or nine full-time employees, and there's 120 rooms at most of our hotels, so it's a very skeleton type crew,
Yeah.
right? And we know the positions that are needed, but the one that fluctuates the most is housekeeping,
Yeah.
and that then becomes dependent on, back to what I was saying earlier, length of stay. Um, in economy extended stay hotels, the kind of standard is every 2 weeks for a cleaning if you're staying through. Okay.
Yeah.
1 week in some brands, it just kind of depends on what kind of level of services you're giving. Or when someone checks out, you got to clean the room, right? So we are constantly using that information too to measure the efficiency of our labor. That's almost even more important. The general manager is going to roll up their sleeves when they need to, so is the AGM. But then for them to understand, am I using this labor well? Is my housekeeping keeping up?
Yeah.
We can take those, what you call minutes, minutes per room, and join it with the data of this is the amount of checkouts, this is the amount of people you had stayed this long, et cetera. This is how much labor you should be using. And that's kind of where this comes into play a little bit more. And then because you're thinly staffed, you're always going to have turnover. And that's the thing you're always trying to then understand is I might have a general or guest attendant, a front desk attendant doing more labor throughout the hotel than just at the front desk. So you're trying to take all those kind of hourly positions and kind of combine them together and say, okay, does this make sense for how this hotel is running at this time? And that's a difficult conversation at times, but it really helps when we can point to something and say, look, I know you said you had more checkouts and you need more labor, but this is still kind of where we expect it to fall, right? And then where do we need to come alongside our general managers, or where do we need to identify you're clearly understaffed or you're clearly overstaffed, and how do we help them navigate that and become partners in that rather than just saying like, okay, fix this. It's a more collaborative approach.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never thought of like efficiency of labor as like a metric. I mean, I've not had anybody on the podcast who's actually said that. So I guess kudos to you for having the first time kind of clarifying that. I'm sure it all exists in everywhere else, but like in the sense that like I've had it articulated to me here. I do think it's interesting though, in the sense that being able to say, are you overstaffed or understaffed? Because I would imagine that type of conversation is also quite awkward in and of itself, because somebody's like crying out for like, I need like more bodies, and you're like, well, efficiency labor kind of falls within the bounds of what we're saying. So then is it a question of like, you're able to ask other questions then, like what is it that makes you think that you need more labor if we are within the bounds of what we think is the right amount of labor?
Right. Or let's then take a closer look at some of the things that are happening within the hotel. Do you have housekeepers kind of just burning time? Are they just sitting around, or are you clearly understaffed and everybody's just burning out because the general manager is cleaning 20 rooms a day while they're also running the hotel? It's not a sustainable model, right? So we're constantly having that discussion and understanding where are we, because I do find, especially when it comes down to the financials of a hotel, you can get out of whack on certain, I budgeted 10 grand for housekeeping and used 12. Let's talk more about what's going on there instead of just saying, get this down to 10, right?
Yeah.
Is there a justifiable reason for it? Do we have enough occupancy or enough turns at the hotel to really make that case and say, okay, we believe you're doing the right thing, even though it's not what we budgeted for, right? So that kind of flexibility, that kind of understanding prevents you from having other unintended consequences, which is maybe GMs doing unethical things, or, you have maybe just completely, like I said earlier, just completely understaffing because you're so stressed out about your budgets here. And let's make sure we understand that we have the right people in place for the right time of year.
No, absolutely. And I think I'm just very fascinated with how you're articulating it, because I've been on a quest to hear from somebody for so long to talk about labor in this context, you know what I mean? Which is like, are there metrics to measure the performance of the labor? Because like, frankly, I don't think it's a very sophisticated operation. I mean, your 56 locations, you were saying, I speak to people with hundreds of locations, and I don't think they speak as cogently about this, if that makes sense. Or think about it in this way. If you were to apply this like a restaurant, it's like, if you're like running front of house, like how do you optimize the right amount of front of house? I very much get like it's a feel as much as it's the data thing. And I'm sure you get that a lot as well in your job, which is like there's also a feel to hospitality. And you're like, there is, but there's also like evidence and data.
Yeah, yeah, and let's measure it, and then, I mean, that's a key part of this, right? Is we really subscribe to the four disciplines of execution. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's a great way to talk about staff and motivating them to do the things that actually lead to results. And so we often talk about the lead measures, to use that language, the measures
Yeah.
that lead to the lag measures, right? And that's the scoreboard. We got to set up a scoreboard for our team so that they understand when they're doing well, when they're winning, and people like winning. So how can I set up the game so we can understand, are we actually putting up points on the board, or are we just completely airballing every single 3-pointer out there?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's also great to use a sports analogy, when it comes to data, because I think we were like, all right, cool. I was almost going to say we did the four steps. I was like, oh, I recognize that from Heroic Leadership by Chris Lowney, which I'm sure you've read. But no, it's interesting. I think ultimately, it's interesting because I hear like the intangibles. People are like, especially in hospitality, like what makes great managers, great leaders, great GMs, directors. People speak to you about like intangibles all the time, and I'm always like pressing them for like, yeah, there's got to be something you're measuring here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's got to be something. And I had somebody on last week, and they are a hotel management pre-development firm, and they talk a lot about like the hotels they have, but also like the pre-development side of their business. And she was saying to me, like that their she was talking really big on like culture, mission, and values, and how their leadership is like performance is pegged against the mission and values as much as it is like the revenue that apartments are generating. And I was like, how are you doing this? And she's like, well, we actually have like practical measures that we have, like, and this episode isn't even out yet, so like speaking on it, it's actually really good. But she spoke about like, there's a thing that they have their leaders do as like a sort of like thank you card, or like a, and you have to send out 8 in 12 months. And she was like, look, there's not a science to this per se, but like the people that send out 8, revenue is like peaking on this other pillar that we're looking at. And the people that don't send these out and don't do their sort of cultural their cultural initiatives, like their revenues way down. So I'm not trying to say that like culture impacts revenue, but we can see a definite correlation between more cultural impact and more revenue impact. And I'm like, you know what? Finally, thank you for speaking to like culture through a revenue lens, because you're trying. And it's the same here with you, which is like trying to look at hospitality with like a data lens and making it make sense and making it show that there is like real clear like business benefits to be had from it, that kind of get past the sort of like intangible sort of hospitality as a kind of a nebulous concept, in a way like culture kind of comes across sometimes as sort of a nebulous concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I totally hear that, and I think there are times in which part of the metrics that we follow is our reviews, right? And just understanding, okay, what are problems that are rising at the hotel, and how is our GM addressing those? What are the things that we need to do to come alongside them in those places too, right? And so there's very much this customer satisfaction that plays into it for sure, because if you see that's the lag measure that shows you, are people really enjoying your hotel or not? And so that's certainly part of this, and it's probably something that at least in economy extended stay doesn't get spoken to enough. But we all kind of implicitly feel like, okay, we're in the hospitality industry, right? We want to make sure people have good stays, they enjoy their stay. It's a clean and safe product that we have out there for people to stay in. But it also just transcends to very much to how we manage our people, right? And how we manage our people then also produces that culture, that ability for a GM to say, yeah, I'm well supported, so I can do the things I'm supposed to do, right? And so that's all kind of feeds in there. I like that, though, in terms of better culture does lead to better revenue for sure.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like one of those like That should be obvious to every single person that ever hears that, but it's not, because I think people, I feel like I hear this all the time, that it's like post COVID, we really want to lean into culture now. We really want to lean into our people. These were frontline staff. They went through so much. There's not enough people
Hmm.
even in the industry anymore. So those that are here, we need to treat them better. Wages are competitive, so we need to do better with like culture and benefits. And so it's like, this is one of the first times I've had anybody actually like speak to it from like, no, it actually can have a revenue impact, and this is how we're measuring it. And I was like, finally, I was like, my eyes lit up. I was like, oh my god, yes, so I need to start doing that. But Gerard, I guess we're coming up on time now. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We can talk about this all day. I'm like soaking it all in. The last question I ask everybody always is kind of a particularly vague one on purpose, and it is like, what advice would you give somebody listening, given everything we spoke about today?
Who am I targeting this advice to? Am I targeting it
Oh,
to
your peers. Your
my
peers.
peers? Uh, I think the advice I have is really in terms of sharing and um, spreading the message of what our goals are and how we're going to get there. Uh, that's such a key component to what we do. And like I said, from the data standpoint, I have so many things I can point to and say, well, I see this and that, and this is why I think we should be doing better. So tell me what's going on from your end, and let's figure out how we attack this together. That those components to sharing the message and making it more collaborative helps us avoid I don't know, disasters, I guess, at the hotel. A lot of times it's let's be all in this together, and let's make sure we're all on the same page so that we can be rowing in the same direction. And if we come down on whatever level of staff within my organization, if I come down with the mantra of fix it, I don't care how you do it, fix it, then I'm not a very good leader within my organization, and my people aren't going to respond to that either. They're going to do it resenting it, or kind of find a new job sooner than later. But if we can do this together and see that our success is all of our success is joined, I think that's where things get really beautiful, and we excel as an organization, as hoteliers. That's where it comes down to, is really making sure that we're in it together.
All right, that's awesome. Rolling it together. I mean, it ties it back to your original calling. Well, Gerard Brown, thanks so much, man, for coming on. You've crushed it. I didn't think I'd be having such a conversation about data, but I just couldn't help myself.
Well, yeah, as you can tell, it's a place that is near and dear to my heart, and it's I am truly the data nerd in terms of what we're doing in hotels. So excited to share it.
You're a gentleman. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Alex.